Welcome to meeting number 44 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Today's meeting is in a hybrid format, and the proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. For the benefit of the witnesses, when it's your turn to speak, I'll recognize you by name, and you can click your microphone icon to activate your mic. Comments should be addressed through the chair. And interpretation in this video conference is available. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you can pick English, French, or the floor, which will give you whatever's being spoken. When you're speaking, speak slowly and clearly for the translators. And when you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. You will see that when your time is drawing to a close, I will gently remind you with this little card. Obviously, we wish we had more time, but in the time that we have, we try to make sure we give everybody the chance to speak, and then we'll move along. So let me just welcome our witnesses today. As an individual, we have Nafisa Chowdhury, who is a lawyer. And from Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat Calgary, we have Fakra Chowdhury and a host of supportive friends as well. So we're glad to have you here today participating in our study on eliminating hate crimes and violence against women and marginalized groups. And so we'll begin with Nafisa Chowdhury for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Honorable members of Parliament, standing committee members, and other guests. So in preparing for today, I gave some thought as to what I could cover in the 5 minutes that have been allotted to me on this most important of topics. That if I could leave behind one message that the Standing Committee might remember when it prepares its report to the House, what would that message be? Islamophobia is a disease that kills. For too many Canadians, it has resulted in serious injury or death. And unless we do something to address it, this is a disease that will continue to spread. Now, a little bit about myself. I graduated from the Faculty of Law at the University of Toronto in 2007. To my knowledge, I was the first visibly Muslim woman to graduate from U of T Law. After graduating, I joined Miller Thomson LLP, one of Canada's national leading law firms, first as an articling student, then as an associate, and finally as a partner, a position that I continue to hold today. In my 14 years on Bay Street, being among a very small minority of visibly Muslim women, I've had the opportunity to work with numerous Muslim community organizations on initiatives to help our community. I've also been called upon in an advisory capacity to provide support to community members at critical times. One such time that will forever stay with me was a summer evening in 2018 when I was asked to attend at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto to speak to the family of Muhammad Abu Marzouk, a young father and husband who earlier that day had attended a picnic with his family in Mississauga Park when he was beaten to within an inch of his life by 2 white men yelling racist and Islamophobic slurs. At the time of the attack, Muhammad was with his hijab-clad wife, who wondered whether it was the sight of her hijab that almost cost her husband his life. And that's the reality of Muslims in Canada, especially identifiably Muslim women. It doesn't matter how accomplished we are, how many degrees we've accumulated, how much we pay in taxes. Almost every single one of us has had an encounter with an Islamophobe, harassed, belittled, and sometimes assaulted for simply being ourselves. How many of us try to mentally train ourselves to respond calmly if verbally assaulted on a subway or in some other public place? How many of us instinctively make mental notes of the exits in a mosque so that we know where to go if we have to flee? How many friends have I heard from, strong professional women, leaders in their own right, about the burnout and exhaustion that they face from the rampant Islamophobia? It shouldn't be happening, and yet it continues to happen. In fact, with the Wild West that is the internet, it seems to be getting worse. The more public-facing you are, the more nonsense you have to put up with. And I know that many of our Muslim women MPs have had to deal with this, as have countless others. I'd like to share a small extract from an article written by my good friend Noor Javed, a journalist at the Toronto Star, who just a few short days ago wrote the following words, and I quote, When I got my first barrage of hate mail as an intern at the Star 15 years ago and turned to a colleague for support, he looked at my hijab and he said, "If you want to survive, you will need to have Teflon-like skin. Let the hate bounce off of you. Don't let it stick." But the truth is, even when you tell yourself it doesn't impact you, it still does. Every email in your inbox with someone telling you they hate you because of your hijab. Every letter calling you a quote, dirty raghead. Every tweet telling you to go back to where you came from. Every person who walks by and whispers, "You're disgusting." Every smear campaign calling you a terrorist. Every time someone doubts your news judgment because you're, quote, a lying Muslim. Every time someone asks if you were a token hire, end quote. Noor's words have resonated with Canadian Muslims far and wide. When the pandemic hit Canada, millions of Canadians understood firsthand what it felt like to be in danger of something that you cannot see, but that continuously lurks. As a society, we've come together, and rightfully so, to tackle this danger and to minimize its effects. We need to do the same when it comes to Islamophobia. I conclude by repeating the same message that I started with. Islamophobia is a disease that kills. I call upon this committee to prepare a report with concrete strategies to stamp out this disease so that Canadian Muslims can just live our lives peacefully, free of harassment, injury, and most importantly, free from the threat of death. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we go to Fakhra Chowdhury. You may go ahead.
Good morning, respected parliamentarians and staff. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. Thank you for having me present today on the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Thank you, Madam Chair, for convening today's meeting. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak today on such an important topic, and I'm saddened that it comes in light of the horrific tragedy against the Muslim family in London, Ontario. May their souls find peace, and may their family and friends left behind find strength and fortitude. My name is Fakhra Chowdhury, and I belong to the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat. We are a revivalist movement within Islam. I was born and raised in Canada. I have grown up in Canada's educational system and now teach at Canadian schools. I was born to escape religious persecution that they were facing in Pakistan for being Ahmadi Muslims and for the inclusive and cohesive society Canada gives. I am extremely grateful for all of the blessings that Canada has given to my family and I, and so many other families that share a story just like my own. It is of course important to highlight the positive Canada has done when mentioning this topic. Some examples of the progress include Motion 103, a motion condemning Islamophobia in Canada. Although not perfect in execution, it was a step in the right direction. Also, the current caliph of our community, Mirza Masroor, was invited to Parliament. He was also invited to speak to major broadcasters. Both are monumental steps to see a major leader of a Muslim community welcomed by the government and media, a Muslim leader on the front cover and not as an attack. We are grateful for these positives, but there are still so many steps that we have to take to become a truly tolerant and accepting society. Systemic racism exists and flourishes through the media, through TV shows and movies, through rhetoric politicians choose to adopt, and through schools and universities. With regards to Muslim women, we are heavily targeted for looking and dressing differently. The hijab, niqab, burqa, or other clothes Muslims garner as a form of modesty is a flashing arrow for anyone who may have prejudices against Muslims, such as Bill 21 in Quebec. I can recount personal experiences facing discrimination in Canada, unfortunately. My own mother has been honked at numerous times for wearing a niqab and yelled at to take it off. We have been shouted at to go home while wearing hijabs and walking around downtown. My friend was denied entry onto the basketball court by the referee for wearing leggings under her basketball uniform in an attempt to comply with her Islamic beliefs. Cars have been keyed, windows have been smashed, and the list goes on. Policies need to be created to ensure that racism does not have a place to show its face in Canada. Online forums, videos, and articles are a big contributor to the radicalization of youth. Those who get Islamophobic ideas and misconceptions often get it online. There is a great need to monitor the cyber world. Greater task forces and resources need to be allocated here so that tragedies are stopped at the root. The legislation on hate crimes in Canada also needs to be revisited. The hate crime law does not go far enough to prosecute people who spread hatred, whether that is online or offline. The RCMP shared during a meeting that oftentimes there is not enough evidence to prosecute people who have committed hate crimes, so their actions go unpunished. There needs to be systems in place to verify and provide consequences for those who commit hate crimes in a more efficient manner. The education system is another place that needs major reform. We need to remember that the terrorist who murdered the family in London was only 20 years old. Curriculums are changed and politicized due to whatever party is in power, which is very problematic. For example, in Alberta right now, there is a lot of controversy about the new curriculum, which many criticize misses the mark on Indigenous and religious issues. And when that curriculum is taught in classrooms in the future, those students will be misguided and begin to have a train of thought that leads towards possible discriminatory ideologies and sometimes to tragic consequences. School curriculums need to be created with the diversity of students in our country in mind, and they especially need to involve experts from various groups during the creation process. Textbooks need to be reviewed by diverse voices to check for instances of unconscious bias and harmful languages. Teachers and professors need to be held accountable for the personal biases they spread in classrooms. Many of us have experiences of teachers speaking out against Islam or spreading what the media has falsely written in the classroom. I have had personal experiences sitting in classes in university with 200 to 300 other students, as a heated debate is being led by the professor in class, whether the niqab ban in Quebec was right, feeling like a spotlight directly on me since I am the only person wearing a hijab. It feels as though my rights are being debated. Teachers need to be taught to include voices in an organic manner, and curriculums need to have those voices integrated right from the start. One way to combat this issue is to increase diversity training and education programs in universities. From my personal experience, in the 5 years I spent at university gaining my education degree, we only had one diversity in classrooms topic, which is definitely not enough. I would like to end my talk off today with a quote from the fifth caliph of our community, Hazrat Mirza Masroor. If we truly want peace in our time, then we must act with justice. We must value equality and fairness. As the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, so beautifully stated, we must love for others what we love for ourselves. We must pursue the rights of others with the same zeal and determination that we pursue our own rights. We should broaden our horizons and look at what is right for the world rather than what is only right for us. These are the means for peace in our age. End quote. Thank you so much for having me here today and for listening to my remarks.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to go into our first round of questioning, and we'll begin with Ms. Sahota for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here. We appreciate your presentation, and I'm sorry to hear some of the personal stories that basically tell us that this is not the Canada that we want to be living in. We want improvements. We want to change how we look at each other so that the visible differences, or other differences for that matter, shouldn't be the basis of how we treat each other. And Ms. Chaudhry, you spoke about your personal experience and how the teachings of equality need to start at a young age. And I just want to tell you a bit of my experience with the Ahmadiyya community. My father ran a taxi company, and we had people from all over the world, basically, who moved to Canada, and they drove taxis with him. So to me, as a person, I don't look at people and their differences as the basis for how I treat them. In fact, it's the exact opposite. I've grown up with a lot of Muslim friends. Some of my best friends were Muslim friends, and the way I see them is just human beings. That's it. And I'm hoping eventually that's how our younger generation doesn't focus on the physical differences or the religious belief differences, all of that. I've grown up like that. I see the name here under the witnesses, Naeem Chaudhry. I call him Uncle Chaudhry. I remember staying at my dad's best friend's house, staying there overnight, his children being our best friends. So I'm saddened to hear these stories when this happens in Canada that I grew up in, where we weren't taught these differences. So I appreciate the fact that we need to start very young, targeting our younger generation to teach them to treat everyone equally. So my question also is going to be on the hate crimes. So if you can speak to the meaning of the term hate crime, you alluded to that in your presentation, Ms. Chaudhry. Well, I guess we have two Ms. Chaudhry, so I'll get the question for both of them, please. And our focus here in this study is to focus on how we move forward so what happened in London, Ontario doesn't happen again. So if you can briefly speak about the meaning of the term hate crime, and then we'll go to how our governments and as parliamentarians we can make things better, or how we can address and support Muslim women.
Very good. We'll begin with the lawyer. Oh, well, okay. We'll begin with you, with Fakra.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
All right. Thank you so much for your question and your kind remarks and sentiments. I would say that hate crimes are any crime, any act that makes another group feel persecuted or hated against. So, for example, this includes big things like keying someone's car or smashing a window, but it can also include things that isolate someone or leave people out of something that they have the right to fully. For example, I brought the example of my friend who was denied. She was on the sports team in high school, and the only reason she was not allowed to go and sub on last second was because she was wearing leggings under her shorts. So I would also include that as a definition of a hate crime as well, or at least a hate act. Even when people are shouting out racial slurs or screaming them on the street when they're driving past you, things like this, that's where hate crimes, that's where they start off. And if we don't nub them at the root, right where they're beginning, oftentimes it can just become the climate of our society. There's many countries in the world where they started off just people were going around and maybe insulting or shouting out hatred against minority groups. And then no one stopped that. The police didn't stop it, or they felt like they didn't have the proper authority to do it. Maybe the legislation wasn't there. So it escalated and escalated to the point where it becomes systemic and it was part of the everyday world. So just to nub it exactly when it's starting off, and anything that's spreading hatred should be stopped, especially online as well. It's very easy to find a lot of hate groups online. Some are hiding in the dark corners, as people have mentioned before, but there are many that are blatantly spreading their hatred, even on social media and things like that. So it should definitely be monitored, and social media organizations should also be encouraged to stop these hatred. There's a lot of things about freedom of voice and freedom of speech and things like that, but of course it goes to an extent. Thank you.
Excellent. Nafisa.
Thank you, Ms. Sahota. So I think the question was, what is my definition of a hate crime? And as a lawyer, obviously, I know that it can be a technical term, and and there's laws. There's laws surrounding hate that are enshrined in the criminal code, and I know there's certain criticisms of the laws and the bars that have been set with respect to those laws. For example, the need for attorney general consent and those kinds of things. It can set high bars, but I don't really want to focus on the technical aspects of what amounts to a hate crime, and the technical drafting and the language surrounding that. I think it's an important question to look into, but I leave that to the experts who really practice in this area and can speak in a more educated way than me. But what I do want to focus on is hate speech, and the fact that words really matter, right? Words kill. We don't, and we don't often think about that. You know, as kids, we grow up and we hear, "Oh, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." But words hurt, and we know that what happens is if we're not actively making efforts to ensure that the words that result in, you know, injury and death, to make sure that those words are not being used and they're not proliferating. If we do nothing to stop that, then it's just going to get worse. And we see this happening, right? And I understand, again, as a lawyer, that there's freedom of expression and it's a balancing act between free speech and you know, regulating what people are able to say. But as a society, we've already understood and accepted that when it comes to certain types of speech, it's unacceptable, no place for it in society, and there's a real harm that's associated with those kinds of hateful speech. And where it's proliferating, particularly that we see, is online, where people can come out, you know, with this cloak of anonymity and feel free to be able to, you know, radicalize people, send out these messages of hatred that others are consuming. The other witness, Ms. Chaudhry, referred to social media platforms. I mean, there is a place for government in all of this in terms of regulating what's being allowed, what's being permitted, what we're allowing other Canadians and other people to consume and then act upon. And that's really what if there's a message that in terms of a productive focus or something that's critical, a critical focus that needs further attention, it's regulating hate speech online.
Very good. Now we're going to go to Ms. Zahid for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to Ms. Nafisa Chaudhry and Ms. Fakhra Chaudhry. We'll have to use the first names to distinguish for appearing before the committee. I know I've known Ms. Nafisa Chaudhry for a long time and have been on different events where I have heard her views on important issues. Thank you for your important testimonies today. My first question is for Ms. Nafisa Chaudhry. You have previously stated in one of your interviews that legal problems require a multifaceted approach. Similarly, the importance of bringing multiple perspectives to address issues like hate crime and violence against women are very much needed. So can you please explain how to bring forward these multifaceted approaches to address issues like hate crime and violence against women? How can we challenge ourselves to look at these issues from multiple perspectives? And what do you feel acts as a barrier to bringing these be broken?
Thank you, Ms. Zahid. I appreciate the question. It's a very big one. It's a very big one that's tough to address in a short period of time. But I think maybe I'll start there. It's such a big issue. I think sometimes we're caught as deer in the headlights, right? Where we see the impacts, right? We saw the Quebec mosque shooting. We heard the story. I mean, Mohammed Abu Marzouk's story was widely reported. We heard about the security guard at IMO who had his throat slit, and now, you know, the London, I mean, I don't want to call it a tragedy. It is tragic, but it shouldn't have happened. And the tragedy seems like, you know, it was out of our control. But you know, these kinds of things shouldn't be happening. And I think as a society, if we're acting together and if we're actually putting things in place, we can avoid these kinds of things from happening. So, you know, what happens when you're dealing with an issue as big as that, which has, you know, so many sources and so many institutional reasons that create them. There's also, you know, individuals and their upbringings and things that fall outside of the public sphere. We sometimes get a little frozen in trying to figure out how we even begin to tackle this issue. And so when I talk about a multifaceted approach, I think it can't just be a legislative, you know, a legal approach. You can't legislate away hate, right? We know that. We can't just set a law and expect that people are going to abide by it and that, you know, the panacea and we're living in a post-racial society. We know that that's never going to happen. So what does that mean? If we know that the laws are not sufficient, does that mean that we do nothing from a legal perspective? Absolutely not, right? There is still a place for government and legislation when it comes to trying to minimize and deter the those who are inclined to engage in hateful acts and hateful speech and to proliferate hate. So there's a place for a legislative response. There's also a place for a policy response. Right? But instances that like policing, the RCMP, we've got CSIS, right? Our spy agency. We've got the CRA. There's been a report recently about the unfair targeting of Muslim charitable organizations. These kinds of things set a tone in society, right? When our government agencies are seen as targeting Muslim community institutions or being unfair to Muslim community institutions, that there's a psychological impact of that as a society, which sort of underscores or reinforces this messaging that Muslims are scary, Muslims are suspicious, Muslims are bad. We have to be conscious of that. So, as from a government policy perspective, multifaceted means also setting aside the legislation, which needs to be addressed, also looking from a policy perspective, addressing these systemic issues that exist in our government agencies and institutions and the unfair targeting of Muslim community organizations, addressing that. So that's one issue. Then there's we've got media, and of course the government doesn't regulate the media, nor should it, right? But perhaps from a government perspective, what can we do to help change the narrative? There's programs and help young Muslims come up through the pipelines, create opportunities for folks who want to get in and who have a different perspective on these kinds of issues. If you're not at the table, then you'll never be able to tell the story, right? So we're seeing. I will say that's not all gloom and doom. We've seen a number of young Muslim journalists, for example, who've been rising through the ranks, who've done well for themselves, but we need more of it. We need more of it. And we need, and there's a place for the government to step in and to encourage people. There's the education component. That's another sort of multifaceted approach, which Ano Fakhra referred to. So, from a curriculum perspective, from teaching young people, from a young age, that these kinds of issues matter. There's also, just going back to the cultural piece. I know the Institute of Islamic Studies at University of Toronto, for example, is Professor Anwar Iman there is hoping to put together an archive, and they're in the planning stages of that for Muslim community archives, where we can get our stories together and gather them and preserve our history, which will be of benefit hopefully to Canada, so that Canadians and journalists and media and cultural institutions can draw upon our narratives to hopefully recast the stories and the images of Muslims in Canada. So there's many pieces to this, and in my view, we should be pursuing them in concurrently. We can't just focus on one at any given time, but at the same time, it's important for the government to know that there is a role for the government to play on those pieces that it can assist with.
Excellent. Maintenant, nous allons Madame Nor.
Now we'll move to Ms. Normandin for 6 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you to our guests. Just the fact of speaking about these issues is already a step in the right direction. People must be alert when they see something unfortunate happening. I'll draw a parallel. There was a wonderful report on Radio-Canada yesterday about people who are harassed online. And what we found is that the people who act in this way don't have a criminal past. And we can't predict what's going to happen. Do you believe that simple citizens, the ordinary Canadian, indulges in this kind of behavior?
In hateful behavior? Sorry, I just wanted to clarify the question.
Oui, dans les gestes.
Yes, hateful behavior indeed, hateful acts.
So there's definitely people who make good choices in society and people who make not so great choices in society. And I definitely don't think that it's everyone in society who's going around and spreading hate and making hateful comments. Whenever a tragedy occurs, or whenever, for example, I can remember in university, there was a time when someone decided that they were going to put Islamophobic posters all around the university. And they decided after school one day that they're going to print out hundreds of these posters and put them around the university. And of course, when we saw those posters, we were not surprised because, of course, this is the narrative that we've been living in. We see it in the media and all these things. But we were saddened, of course. But what came out of that is every time there's a tragedy or something comes out in the media or something negative happens, a lot of positive comes out after that as well. And we've seen this with the London, Ontario tragedy as well, where we get a chance to see the amazing things that happen, the amazing people in the world and the amazing acts that they do. A lot of times people are just holding their opinions in, even if they're positive. Many times when they're negative, they like to proclaim them and shout them out. But many times when they're positive, they don't feel the need that they need to stand with people or, hold vigils, give support, be an ally. But when things like this happen, then you really see the beautiful fabric of Canada and the beautiful multiculturalism get together. So I definitely do not think that everyone has these hateful thoughts in their mind. Maybe they have prejudices that come from birth. Some people are trying to unlearn them. Some people are accepting them. But there's many people in Canada who are, in fact, being allies, whether it's for Muslim groups, whether it's for Black communities, whether it's for Indigenous groups. We saw that with the horrible gravesite that was found with the Indigenous community as well. So many people now I see in my neighborhood as well have orange shirts in their windows. So that's amazing to see as well. Thank you.
Nafisa.
Thank you, Ms. Normandine. Bonjour. I agree very, very much with the comments of Akra. I think that the majority of Canadians are not hateful people, or are not intending to cause harm. But we're all human, and this goes for every single one of us on this call, myself included. We have our own prejudices and we have our own biases, and they are informed by our surroundings, our environments, our upbringings, and to the extent that if we're not examining what our biases are and if we're not having conversations about them, then unfortunately we can act out on them. And what's happening, just drawing it back to online again, is that people are finding their echo chambers. So where you already got a predisposition to a particular viewpoint, even if in the past you may have not been inclined to do anything about it, when you find your echo chamber that's encouraging you and goading you on, unfortunately what it's doing is it's creating situations for people who might not otherwise have spoken out about their personal prejudices. They're finding that the internet is being a safe space for them, and they're being encouraged to put that out there, and that in turn encourages other people, and so it proliferates that way. And I like to think that people inherently are good, right? That, given a choice, most people wouldn't want to harm their neighbor, wouldn't want to harm their friends, wouldn't want to harm their colleagues. If you know someone and they've been humanized to you, then it's much more difficult to hate them or to dislike them or to see them as foreign, suspicious, and scary. So some of that, I think some of overcoming these barriers requires us to know each other and to get to know each other, which means that we need more participation in every aspect of society. And, I started on Bay Street 14 years ago, and there was nobody who looked like me on Bay Street. It's just in the Bay Street firms, it just didn't exist. And I saw this as an opportunity to speak to my colleagues who, I was always very open and encourage people to ask me questions, because I know if you don't ask me questions, then you're probably assuming, and that's not good, right? So, and I've found the discussions to be really eye-opening, right? That people just have questions, they don't know any better, and there are assumptions that are made. And yet, when you have an opportunity to have an honest conversation with someone, people are open to expanding their horizons. And once you become friends with someone, again, those things fall away, and we're just two people having a chat, right? So, it would be good to have programs that encourage people to get to know each other. But I do think that as a society, as Canadians, we have to also be aware that because we pride ourselves in being a multicultural and a diverse society and lauding diversity, that this somehow means that Canadians don't harbor these racist sentiments. Unfortunately, many Canadians, both in cities and in rural neighborhoods, continue to harbor these unfortunate sentiments. And I don't think they do so maliciously. I think a lot of it is in ignorance, but it is something that exists. And I think we would be silly to think that we're a post-racial society. We're not.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
And for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming before us today and sharing your thoughts. I kind of wanted to build actually just from this past conversation. We've had a lot of conversations here at this committee on a variety of issues, but we just finished up the sexual misconduct in the military study, and we were talking about women not being as hired or brought into the military, and them the military trying to ensure that they had more women as not only leaders but just service people, and ensuring that there was a greater mix, that there was a greater attention drawn. And so when you talk about Ms. Chowdhury, you were talking about that within the workplace, getting to know the people within your workplace, ensuring that there is a multicultural workplace, at least at a federal level.
I'm sorry, Ms. Matheson, could you raise your microphone closer to your nose? We're getting some popping. Thank you, sorry.
Thought I had done that well before. So within the workplace, of course, and the federal government has an employment equity strategy and act. However, there continues to be a lot of racism, accountability problems within that employment equity act. So can you maybe talk about the strengthening of that equity act? I know that it's only at a federal level. There are lots of implications that would have on provincial levels as well, but setting that bar, setting that standard, and the benefits from that investment of underrepresented groups being brought more into that Employment Equity Act.
Sure. I mean, I think that those are the types of strategies that are critical because they send a message. I think that there's a symbolic benefit to it. Apart from the practical benefits of it, when the government sets a message at our highest level of government that this is something that's important to our country, that's important to us as a society, and that there are and actually legislates it such that there are consequences for you can play lip service to something, but they say talk is cheap, and you can talk the talk or you can walk the walk, and sometimes people need to be given that additional push in order to walk the walk. And so that's why I think these programs are very, very important, and they're gonna draw criticism. It's always balancing, that has to happen, and all those kinds of things. But from a symbolic perspective, and then from the practical perspective, there are huge benefits to those kinds of programs. As an employment, I practice actually, most of my practice is employment law, about 90% of my practice. I don't practice mostly at the federal level. Most of my practice is provincially regulated. But, I see issues and challenges that come up in the workplace all the time. I'm mostly management side, so I act for employers and businesses, and understand, the day-to-day challenges that employers face. At the same time, it's so important to have diverse workplaces, and to have employers who are empowered to know how to manage diverse workforces. So, there's, to the extent that there are resources available, and big corporations that I represent do okay in this sphere. The smaller businesses struggle a little bit more. They don't have the resources, they don't have the the time to understand, and oftentimes people will hire from their own communities or those kinds of things. That being said, I'm seeing more and more that workforces are becoming more diverse. That's just a reflection of Canadian society. What we'd like to see is that management starts to reflect Canadian society as well. So it's not just sort of the entry level positions. That's a whole other topic that is I could to sometime, but it's a very good one. So thank you for raising it.
Well, and certainly in terms of how we get rid of a lot of the barriers that people of color, Muslim people, Indigenous people, all kinds of Black people face, but mainly when we talk about new immigrants and the removal of barriers in terms of the requirements within a specific profession. If you could talk, both of you actually would see that, of course, within your individual professions, but if you could talk about the impact that that has on community as well.
Akra.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. It's really important to remove those barriers. I was thinking while Nafisa was talking, and I agree with all the points that she brought up, how important it is to increase the diversity in the workplace and how it is a symbol and it gives power to all the diverse groups and just Canada in general. When we start seeing more diverse workplaces, more diverse schools, more diverse is really important is that the people hired are not just viewed as diversity hires, because oftentimes they can receive backlash for that from their management, from their other coworkers, from various other groups. They themselves might be feeling that as well. So removing those barriers is very important so that they're able to receive the education, receive the same quality training, receive the same opportunities so that they feel confident, and people as well, when they go in those workplaces, feel confident in their ability to execute whatever their job requirement is. And not just that, oh, this X person is Black and this X person is Muslim, so we hired them on. They might not have the qualifications. Just so there's confidence for every single person who's in the workplace, as well as the person who's also going in. Because being the only person, it's amazing that the workplaces are getting more diverse, but of course, there's some that are still plainly one type of ethnic group or religion. That first person who's entering that workplace, it is really important to have those conversations, but many times that person might not want to be the person who's answering all the questions for people or representing the whole faith or the whole race or whatever the situation may be. So when they have that confidence and removing those barriers is just very important, as you mentioned. Thank you.
Very good. Now we'll go to Ms. Wong for 5 minutes. Ms. Wong, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank
There you
you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think I was really impressed by, all the witnesses. I mean, having been a teacher myself and having had a lot of my own students going to the law school and having met a lot of wonderful female lawyers. So, I mean, your performances and in fighting for something, worth fighting, because as we can all.
I'm sorry, Ms.
tell.
Wong, can you raise your mic closer to your nose? Thank you. Sorry,
Right.
popping.
Yeah. So I think it's important to notice that education plays a very important role. I mean, you can see even young kids. I mean, having some of my, own relatives coming home and say, oh, I mean, they're not female, but they're boys and girls, both of them. They said, oh, they call me, bananas, or they call me, and they say, well, go back to China. Actually, they were born here. So I just like to, any of the witnesses today to comment more on the importance of really having that education done and what the communities can do. For example, the true meaning of different religions, like, definitely the international media hasn't helped at all, because they only told stories, horror stories, and yes, unfortunately, whatever, there are lots of the world, but then we were educated by the international media to actually, unfortunately, build our own biases. So would any of you like to comment more on the education part and how your community can actually get involved in the classrooms or schools so that they truly understand what Muslim means, or the religion itself is peace and harmony. Because I belong to a multi-faith group, in Richmond, and we work so nicely together, having kids reciting their own literature, and it was a beautiful scene. And that whole number 5 row in Richmond is called the highway to heaven. So we got all religious groups with their temples and school on the same street. So we are very proud of that harmony. But that harmony needs to be built right from a very young age. So can any of you please feel free to comment on that?
I see Nafisa.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I'm happy to speak to the issue. It's been a while since I've been back in sort of the school system. But look, I went through the public school system I grew up in Scarborough, east of Toronto, or I guess part of Toronto, but on the east side. Right from junior kindergarten right through high school. And what I don't know if curriculum has really changed a lot since I went through the system, but what really stood out to me is that it wasn't really part of the curriculum at all, right? You don't learn about other people's religions, you don't learn about other people's faith systems, other people's cultural practices and those kinds of things. Maybe the odd sort of, you pay some lip service here and there for a celebratory event, but in terms of an actual deep dive into what are people's belief systems, what are what are these tenets that people live their lives by, that Canadians live their lives by. The only time I learned about it was when I was a high school student and I signed up for an elective class, which was my favorite classes. I absolutely loved it. I loved learning about, I obviously know my own faith tenets, but learning about others was so eye-opening, and I continue to, it was a learning experience that continues to pay dividends now in my career, decades later. So, but it was an elective course. It was me and 25 other students that happened to be in the course. Nobody else was in it. And, I'm hopeful that from a curriculum perspective, that there's more attention to this that's provided to young folks who are coming up through the systems, so that they're learning these things from a younger age. And it's not just, 30 people out of a, 2,000 person school that's getting this kind of education. So that I think that is important. And the multi-faith events, they happen, and certainly those who participate, I'm sure, get a lot from it. But oftentimes you're preaching to the choir, right? And I think that's also with the world religions classes. Those of us who are interested in taking it, it's because we obviously had an interest in it and we want to learn, and we want to not be ignorant, wholly ignorant kinds of things. So how do you get to those folks who are not part of this choir, right? That's the challenge. And from an interfaith perspective, again, you can't force people into those kinds of programs. It just I think Ms. Wong, you spoke about, we get a lot of training by international media, and that's just the reality of our society. So if that's the case, right? If the folks who are not in the choir, that's how they're being educated, we have to start thinking about how do we ensure that where they do get their education from reflects the messaging that or that education that they need to be getting. If that's going to be the source, well, let's do what we can to ensure that source has the right messaging in it, or at least counter narratives to the harmful messaging that it contains.
Very good.
Chair, how much time
Now
do I have?
None. Now we're going to Ms. Sidhu for 5 minutes.
Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all the witnesses for joining us today. My question is to Nafisa Chaudhary. You said in your statement, hate racism is a disease and we need to stop that. But recent study found that more than 6,000 right-wing extremist channels, pages, and accounts on social media are linked to Canadians. And I have spoken to members of our local Peel Islamic Center and other Muslim community groups, many ethnic groups. They express concern about these groups. Can you tell us if you believe the toxic online environment contributes to the recent hate incidents? What are your recommendations to combat that?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. It's the short answer is yes. I think that the online toxicity is a huge contributing factor to the the rise in Islamophobia, the rise in racist conduct, quite frankly, right? Beyond just Islamophobia, there's, again, just going back to these echo chambers where people are finding themselves in, in groups or in online discussions or in social media channels where, the worst elements of their prejudices are being spoken to and being encouraged. And then they're being given a platform to come together and to organize and to, to act, unfortunately, upon this hateful messaging. It really is unfortunate that these platforms exist, and it's a very difficult task that government has in terms of trying to regulate it. I understand that it's a difficult task. I understand the challenges that come with it, particularly when we're living in a free and democratic society where freedom of expression is something that rightfully we hold dear, right, in our society, and we need to toe that line between censorship and tackling things again that are actually resulting in death, right? So there's a harm principle here. And as a society, decades ago, when we first came up with our hate speech laws, these discussions happened, and it was recognized, accepted that words can kill, right? And I remember learning in my first year constitutional law class, talking about screaming fire in a crowded theater and the impact that has, right? You cause a stampede and people die just from one word. So words do have an impact. And when people are finding these forums online that are unregulated, that allows them to, with the cloak of anonymity, to proliferate these very, very harmful messages and to recruit others into this hateful ideology that they're teaching, it's a problem. And there are going to be impacts. There are going to be consequences. People will continue to die, unfortunately, unless we do something about it, because we can't expect that we'll just turn a blind eye and pretend it's like not happening and that things are going to be better. It won't get better. So even though it's a difficult thing for the government to do, to have to regulate, to figure out how to regulate it, it's something that the government must do. And they have to, as a government, I don't envy your task as the legislators. You have a difficult road ahead, but it's a critical road that needs to be done immediately. It can't be sort of put on the back burner. As a society, as Canadians, we don't shy away from things just because they're hard. We have to do them. And, that means talking to the people who are experts in this field to come up with a way to, have laws and regulations and policies in place that curb that harmful stuff that's going on in a way that still respects, our liberties.
Thank you. And my next question is to representative of the Ahmadiyya community. We have an engaged and committed Ahmadiyya community here in Brampton, and I commend their work across Canada is fighting hate. We have a vaccine clinic at Masjid Mubarak, raising fund for the community, and we are always grateful for their work. But Ms. Chaudhary, another aspect of this study is focused on cyberbullying, which is more frequently experienced by young Canadians. Are you aware of young members of your community being cyberbullied for their religion?
So many times, thank you for your question. Many times cyberbullying, those who are going through it, they keep it private. And many times, even parents, it can be happening in the same household. Their child can be feeling so many types of emotions, going through so many breakdowns, and they have no idea, because when you have a phone or a tablet or whatever they use, you can keep your life it seems, in categories like your online world, your in-person world, your home life, your school life. So in my personal experience, I know that there are people, when they post things, on example for Twitter, and just because they might be Muslim or just because they might be Ahmadi Muslim, they'll get a lot of backlash. Especially on Twitter, if you go on Facebook, if you go outside of just your friend group and you post on another forum, if you go on any other type of social media like this, Instagram, if you're posting on a public picture, there are many, many people who will reply back with hateful things. And oftentimes it's the same people who are just going to the different social media accounts and just going to different posts just to copy paste their same hateful comments over and over again. They don't want to have a reasonable dialogue with you if you try to engage with them. all they want to do is spew their hate. So I've had that personal experience for sure, but I do believe that the extent of it is not understood by myself or even parents or teachers or whoever it may be, because many times people just keep it inside or they just accept it as a normal thing that happens online, which is one of the worst things, that it shouldn't be accepted as normal.
Merci. Maintenant, on va avoir une question.
Thank you. Now we'll have a question from Ms. Normandin. Thank you very much. Nafisa, I'd like to piggyback on the comment you made in response to my former question. You talked about biases, sometimes unconscious biases that find an echo chamber with other people. Sorry, but the sound is cutting out. We developed the concept of ordinary sexism. Everyday issues that people don't notice, but insidiously they contribute to hatred in general. The study deals with online hatred and cyber criminality, but should we also deal with ordinary quote-unquote Islamophobia if such a thing does exist?
Absolutely. These kinds of, I think we call it unconscious bias or the microaggressions that, folks deal with on a day-to-day basis. As women, we've all experienced it, right? Everyone, I'm sure, on this group discussion has experienced what it feels like to have to deal with these microaggressions as a woman. And, when we're talking about, when we're having these kinds of discussions, and I know today we're talking about the intersectionality between women and being a woman from a marginalized group or from a racialized community, that the same sorts of microaggressions that may impact you as a woman, you have to deal with that, and then compounded on top of that, you're dealing with the fact that you're a visible Muslim. And for my Black Muslim women, it's one step even worse, right? To be Black and Muslim and female, it's those are yes, there are absolutely day-to-day things that we women have to put up with to begin with, and then when you layer on all of the other difficulties, or the microaggressions that come with it, yes. And if the government's already got a strategy to deal with these things or to look at these things and come up with ways to overcome them, then I would absolutely encourage that these other categories like microaggressions that come from being a visible Muslim. And it's not just women, Muslim men also face it. But also, I think as diverse communities, we also have to be careful about, Fakhra has talked about being from the Ahmadi community, so she's a minority within a minority. So that, further compounds the issues. But, certainly there are challenges that we face for being Muslim. And I find that for me, as part of my identity, and I can only speak for myself, I feel that more as a Muslim person, as a visible Muslim person, rather than as a woman. I mean, if I had to, rank which one I feel the impacts of more, it would be the fact that I've got, this cloth on my head that sort of screams to the world what my religious beliefs are, and some of the fallout from that. So yes, I don't know if that answers your question, but
very good. Now we're going to go final question, Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think that is key, that intersectionality and understanding that and applying it to the legislation, ideally, that we bring forward, and certainly legislation on online hate is well overdue and much required. But I wanted to quickly ask both of you. I had put forward what long asked for by the Muslim community for the National Action Summit on Islamophobia, and hopefully that will occur this summer. But I'm asking you maybe to put forward a couple of recommendations from each of you that you would like to see come from that summit, and then the actions taken by the government to fulfill them.
We'll start with Fakhra.
Thank you for the question, and I'm so glad to hear that there's a summit happening in summer with this topic, since it is so important. Some of the recommendations I made in my introductory remarks as well, so I can just repeat them quickly. For myself and for my community, monitoring online hate, monitoring online hate groups, hate speech, social media, having restrictions on things like this. is really important to discuss in the summit, and we've gone through this throughout our talk, so I'm sure that everyone here is aware of that. As well, it's really important that in education, because we've talked about this as well, the curriculum, how teachers, professors are trained, that they are trained properly, and that the curriculum incorporates diverse voices. And that doesn't just mean having a math textbook and having a diverse name or having a diverse picture. That is not really diversity in the curriculum. So having diversity in the curriculum in a proper way, like Nafisa mentioned before, I also attended school, kindergarten to grade 12 and university as well in Alberta though. And there was not many diverse topics, and it shouldn't be up to the teachers to sometimes bring in a topic or sometimes talk about current events, because oftentimes maybe the teachers are not also fully aware of all of the diverse groups of students that are around them and all the diverse groups that are in Canada, and they also bring their prejudices and biases as well. So oftentimes it can feel as though your teacher is misrepresenting your group, and when you're a child, when you're a student, it does not feel great at all when your teacher, who you look up to, who's in charge of class, who 30+ students are looking towards, is spewing hate maybe about Muslim groups or Black communities or Indigenous groups or whatever the situation may be. So teacher training definitely needs to happen, professor training as well, the curriculum changes as well, looking at online hate, and yeah, thank you.
Very good. And Nafisa, brief final comment.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you to all the attendees today for the opportunity to speak. And Ms. Matheson, thank you for being a proponent of this national summit. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I echo what Fakhra said. You know, online hate, regulating online hate is really critical. I really do see that as being a very, very important piece that the government needs to move on, because only the government really is empowered to be able to address this in a way that can make a difference, that needs to make a difference. So that would be number one. And number two, I know there's been some discussion about the appointment of a special envoy. I like that suggestion, provided that it's resourced, right? Because we don't want just an envoy who's sitting there, you know, in a symbolic way, you know, and so that we can say, okay, we've got an envoy. You know, it would be nice to have someone who is dedicated to addressing this topic and helping the government address this topic, who's properly resourced to be able to provide the feedback and the you know, the guidance that the government can use on this topic. And you know, there's other community groups who will have other suggestions, and I'm sure they will have very good suggestions. So very briefly, those are my comments.
Wonderful. Before I do my final thanking of the witnesses, Monsieur Serret.
Just quickly, Madam Chair, can you ask the witnesses to provide any other additional recommendations in writing to the committee?
Yes, I would invite the witnesses, if there are things that you wanted to say that we didn't get to, please send them to the clerk and they will be part of our report. I want to thank both of you for excellent and amazing testimony today. I think we're going to do great things together and I appreciate it very much. And while we're in the public realm, I also want to say to the clerk and the analysts, all of our interpreters, those technicians that have worked in the room all this long session, thank you so much for your work. You've done excellent work, and to the committee, you've been amazing. Now we're going to go in camera for our final committee business. So if you remember to log off and log in on the in-camera login, I'll see you on the other side in about 10 minutes. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. you.